Where did you get this ring?" Mark was so shocked that he didn't even notice that he squeezed the young assistant's hand so hard. "Where did you get my great-grandmother's ring?" Pearl looked at the pale chief with horror. Mr. Chapman squeezed her palm even harder. The girl cried out, "Mark Chapman, you're hurting me. Are you out of your mind? This is my mother's ring. She gave it to me for tonight." "Mother's ring? What the hell?" Mark got angry, then suddenly fell silent and asked her in a moment, "What was your mother's name?" Pearl didn't have time to answer before a rattling bell sounded from somewhere. Intermission. The door to the theater box swung open, and Mr. Chapman's German partners, who had been invited to the ballet, crowded into the corridor where this ridiculous dialogue between him and Pearl was taking place. Mark didn't get a chance to ask her 1,000 questions privately during the intermission. The foreigners didn't take a single step away from the charming blonde, who spoke fluent German. Mark Chapman watched the second act on pins and needles. He wrinkled his nose in disgust at the sound of applause. It seemed that the whole audience in the hall was aware of the man's nervous condition, and out of spite, gave him a round of applause. When will this endless ballet, which many people for some reason sincerely considered art, come to an end? The day has been bad since early this morning. Mark had a serious fight with Allison, his stubborn girlfriend. The beautiful girl was offended that Mark had not come to see her again yesterday, and she flatly refused to accompany him to the theater tonight, where he, the CEO of a company specializing in medical equipment, had invited his foreign partners. Allison, that was the last straw. Mark grudgingly threw the phone on the table and began to walk around the spacious office. He noticed that he was standing near the door. Exhaling, he looked out into the reception area, pretended as if he hadn't seen the small line of people who had come in for various interviews and meetings, and briefly ordered the assistant. "Coffee, please. Just black coffee, no sugar. And please don't bring me a tray full of sugary crap like cookies or something like that again." Back at his office desk, Mr. Chapman imagined Allison's angry and haughty face. How many times has he said those idiotic words about the last straw? Who is he trying to scare with that? Why does he keep getting stuck in a relationship that burdens him even more and more every day? A polite knock on the door. His assistant Pearl entered the office, holding a small square tray with a single porcelain cup. "Mark Chapman, your coffee. Black, no sugar. No sugary junk." She smiled. Mark's heart warmed. He liked this pretty girl, working at the company for the second month. The slim blonde with long hair and intelligent gray eyes reminded her boss of someone, but who? Mark had seen Pearl's husband a couple of times. Handsome, pleasant-looking Darcy came to pick up his wife after work several times. They got married only 6 months ago and still looked at each other with admiring glances. And Mr. Chapman enjoyed sneaking a glimpse of the couple in love. It was obvious that there were no resentments, no lies, and no silly jealousy between the newlyweds. Speaking of jealousy, Mark had a brilliant idea. "Pearl, I've seen your husband a couple of times. He seems like a normal, decent man." "What do you mean, Mark Chapman?" said the girl with an exasperated frown. "I mean, wouldn't he go mad with jealousy if I invite you to the theater tonight?" "Can't Miss Allison accompany you?" The assistant was quick to assess the situation. "Well, I could say so," grinned the chief, "and I certainly don't want to go to the theater by myself. Besides, you speak German, so I don't have to take that tedious interpreter with me. Pearl, please help me out. Tell your husband it's my personal responsibility. My driver will bring you to the theater and drive you home after the show." "That won't be necessary. Darcy will bring me there and then pick me up after the show." At the theater, Pearl charmed foreigners with her beautiful manners, her brilliant knowledge of the language, and her radiant smile. Mark, who had seen the girl daily and always considered her pretty, was now struck by her beauty. The slender figure in the elegant blue dress, the graceful arms, the delicate neck, the appealing gaze. Mr. Chapman did not like ballet, so during the first act, he entertained himself by looking at the audience in the parterre and the neighboring boxes. He caught a glimpse of Pearl fixing her hair. A stone on the ring sparkled on her thin finger. It was an expensive piece of jewelry, antique. Platinum, sapphire, and a cluster of small diamonds. What? Mark couldn't believe his eyes. What? Not realizing how strange his behavior looked, he grabbed the girl by the wrist, and apologizing to the foreigners, literally dragged her out of the box. Mark unceremoniously took the ring off the frightened assistant's finger. Inside the ring, he read the sorely familiar inscription, "Love eternally." Then, he nervously and insistently asked Pearl, where did she get the family heirloom? After the show, Mr. Chapman said a long goodbye to his partners, who were in no hurry to get into the solid car provided by the company. Smiling to the left and to the right, Mark discreetly kept an eye on Pearl, who was standing off to the side. She was talking to someone on the phone. When the girl waved goodbye to the German partners and moved leisurely in the other direction, Mr. Chapman almost howled in frustration. He almost forced his guest into the car, ordered his driver and the guard to wait, and then rushed after the assistant. But Pearl did not think of running away. She calmly waited for Mark to approach. "What is your mother's name?" the boss asked, panting. "Vivian." Pearl kept her eyes fixed on him, as if she'd known his reaction beforehand. "Vivian Herman." Though Mark had been waiting for this exact answer for an hour, he suddenly found himself not ready for it. He was confused, fidgeting, and asked in an inarticulate way, "Aren't you Mrs. Merritt?" "Well, I'm married to Mr. Merritt," Pearl said softly. "Didn't your mom go to the university and—" "Of course she did." "Mark Chapman." The girl interrupted him. "You studied at the same university." "Do you know who I am?" asked Mr. Chapman, stupidly. "I mean, do you know what we had in common with your mother?" "Well, I knew that at the university my mother dated some Mark Chapman, that she was in love with him very much. But when I started to work in your company, I had no idea that you were that Mark Chapman. It's a very common name, and it's a big city. What are the chances of meeting the right Mark Chapman? And 2 weeks ago, I showed my mother the pictures from the company party, and she recognized you immediately." Pearl smiled. Mark felt a pang in his heart. 2 weeks? So Vivian never took the time to contact him? Or she didn't want to? "Why did she give you that ring?" "My mother didn't give it to me," Pearl admitted. "I took it myself." "Why?" Mark was confused. "Excuse me, Mark Chapman. My husband is waiting for me in the parking lot." She suddenly hurried away. "I'll see you Monday." Mr. Chapman looked silently after Pearl. Then he came to his senses. "How old are you?" he called after her. 22. Pearl turned around for a second and waved goodbye. When Mr. Chapman opened the front door, he immediately heard music. A lilting jazz melody was spreading throughout the apartment. A soft light illuminated the huge living room. Allison sat on the couch with a glass of wine, stretching her endlessly long legs. "Chapman, I've decided to forgive you," she announced languidly. Mark looked intently at the young seductress, as if seeing her for the first time. Who was this strange woman? What was she doing in his apartment? He did not move. He searched in vain for answers to questions he should have asked himself long ago. Allison, sensing something was wrong, immediately changed her tone. "Darling, is everything right? Why are you so silent? Why only I have to work on a relationship all the time?" "What are you talking about?" Mark was surprised. "The scheme of our relationship is very simple. You give me the beauty, and I give you money. I'm sorry, but could you please leave?" Allison opened her mouth, but apparently there was something so adamant in her boyfriend's face that she suddenly got up, grabbed her purse, and headed for the exit. "Leave the keys on the table, please." Mark was absolutely confident in his decision. The shocked Allison didn't say a word again. She took the keys out of her purse, put them on the glass table, and accumulating the remnants of her haughtiness, with a spectacular defiant step, she left Mr. Chapman's life forever. While happily taking off his jacket, Mark suddenly remembered something and slipped his hand into his pocket. The ring. He didn't give Pearl the jewelry back. What an idiot! What would the girl think of him? That he was an arrogant cheapskate who had returned the family heirloom? And what will Vivian think of him now? That night, Mark did not sleep a wink. He drank cognac, read the inscription inside the ring for the 1,000th time, and remembered his university years in Vivian, his first and only love. So that's why when he saw Pearl, his heart clenched with quiet joy, as if he had met a relative he hadn't seen in a long time. A petite blonde, Pearl looked nothing like the tall, brown-eyed Vivian, but there was certainly something subtly similar between mother and daughter. The gentle, rustling laugh, and the way she tidies her hair, The graceful turn of her head, the amiable look, the cute dimples on her cheeks. Memories flooded over Mark as if those 17 years of separation had never happened. Love eternally. Oh, how much he loved his Vivi. The thought of her took his breath away. He loved the golden sparkle in her brown eyes, the slight curve of her dark eyebrows, and the plump lips that were always ready to smile. When the sun lightened her brown hair, it got an amazing chocolate hue. At that moment, Mark literally froze in delight. A young man from a wealthy family, he was so proud of his golden girl, who came from distant provinces and entered a prestigious university at the first attempt. It was love at first sight. They couldn't leave each other for a minute. Every evening, Mark would wait for Vivian at the dormitory, and they would walk in the nearby park until late at night. Like charmed, they wandered along the circular asphalt path, nodding to the familiar residents of the neighborhood walking the dogs. In the light of the streetlight, the fallen leaves glittered in every shade of yellow, from gold to pale lemon. Vivian liked the blonde-red maple leaves the most. The entire dorm room was full of autumn bouquets. Sometimes, Vivian's friends would go off to sleep somewhere else, mercifully giving the loving couple a chance to spend some time together. Behind the wall, the TV was yelling, the neighbors were fighting, and student life was buzzing in the hallway. But they couldn't hear a single sound, reveling in each other's company. The moon dimly illuminated the dwelling, breaking through the frosty patterns of the window. In the spring, a lush branch of a lilac bush tapped insistently on the ground floor window. In summer, the room was flooded with the sweet smell of jasmine. Vivian, today I realized that I can't live without you. We've been dating for over a year. I want to kiss you every second, hold your hand 24 hours a day. He pressed his hand into Vivian's cheek, then touched her fingers with his lips. I even call everyone around me Vivian, even our housekeeper and my mom's stylist and the janitor. And today, I look at the grim face of my mother's driver and say, Vivian, my mother told me to be here by 6. Don't lie, Vivian laughed. I swear, I'm ready. It's time to get married. Are you sure? The girl looked at him with a happy but distrustful look. Aren't you ready? Maybe you just don't want to marry me. Mark pretended to be indignant. I dream of it. I'm just so afraid of your mother, Vivian admitted. To be honest, Mark was worried that the overbearing, adamant mother, Mrs. Drusilla Chapman, wouldn't want a simple country girl as her daughter-in-law. He was already mentally prepared for the upcoming battle. But Drusilla was quite sympathetic to his request to meet Vivian. Drusilla Chapman even cooked dinner herself, something she hadn't done for ages. That evening was spent in a warm, almost family atmosphere. Mark could see that his mother liked the well-mannered, sincere Vivian. Mark was happy to have his hunch confirmed when his mother began inviting the girl along to beauty salons, shopping, and the theater. When the couple announced their decision to marry, Drusilla looked carefully at both of them and left the room. She returned a few minutes later with a small velvet box in her hand, a platinum family ring. A sapphire surrounded by small diamonds sparkling like stars. Vivian, this ring was given to my grandmother by her fiancé, my grandfather, to celebrate their engagement. See what it says inside. Love eternally. And you guys should love each other forever, too. And never even say ugly words like divorce out loud. Vivian was touched to her heart. They decided to get married in 6 months, right after they finished their second year. They were planning a trip to Vivian's hometown for Christmas, as Mark was anxious to meet his future mother-in-law. In early December, on a Saturday night, Vivian called Mark and asked him not to visit her tomorrow. Feel so bad. I think it's the flu. Don't come to me tomorrow. You can get sick too. But how could Mark be stopped by the imaginary danger of some flu when he'd already missed her so madly overnight? The boy whistled light-heartedly as he walked toward the dorm. He was carrying berries and a box of orchids for his beloved, excitingly anticipating how his surprise would delight Vivian. Chapman, are you crazy? She will scold him cheerfully. Raspberries, blueberries. It's too expensive. It's out of season. What a pretty orchid. Mark found Vivian alone in her room. She was hurriedly packing her bags. She blushed when she saw her beloved, and looked at him with such frightened eyes, as if he had caught her at a scene of a crime. Where are you going? I hope not to your mother's. Mark playfully snatched the blue sweater from Vivian's hands. We are supposed to go together. It's 3 weeks till Christmas. Give it back. Vivian took the sweater from him irritably and continued packing. Without turning to Mark, she said quietly but ruthlessly, "I'm leaving for good. Sorry." "Are you out of your mind?" Mark waved his hand nonchalantly, still unaware of what was happening. However, it took him a second to realize that Vivian wasn't kidding. "Vivi, my love, what happened? Did something happen at home? Is your mother sick?" "Nothing happened." Vivian looked indifferently into his eyes. "I just don't love you anymore, and I don't want any wedding." "Did you fall out of love with me overnight?" Mark refused to believe the nightmare that was happening in front of his eyes. "Suddenly, you started to hate me so much that you even decided to quit university right before the exams?" "That's right." Mark still recalled that terrible morning with pain in his heart. He said something, persuaded, begged, insulted with helplessness and resentment, took away her bag. But Vivian was adamant. When Mark, in desperation, wiping angry tears from his face, finally threw the bag right at her feet, the girl calmly picked up the bag and silently walked away, for good. The dark days came for Mark. Indifferent to alcohol, the guy suddenly began drinking, so badly that he did not even notice how he failed his exams. A worried Drusilla offered her son to try to find the girl, but he, outraged to the core, flatly refused his mother's help. "That's ridiculous, son. Maybe there really is something wrong with Vivian. And you do nothing, reveling in your own wounded pride. This is not right." "Mom." Mark looked cold and determined. "I won't drink anymore. I'll pass the exams, I promise. I'll stop suffering from now on, but please stay out of my personal life and never talk to me about her." After all these years, Mark Chapman still couldn't explain Vivian's strange behavior. Why had she left the university? Gone who knows where? Why? And then it dawned on Mark. Vivian left him 17 years ago. Pearl is 22 now. So, Vivian already had a 5-year-old daughter when they were dating. Why didn't she say anything about a little girl? So she had a daughter, so what? What did that have to do with his sweetheart's hasty escape? Mr. Chapman felt like he was going crazy. He should talk to Pearl tomorrow and finally find out what happened. However, in the morning, Mark just nodded nervously to his assistant and quickly made his way to his office. The girl stopped him at the threshold. "Wait, Mark Chapman." Pearl stood up from her desk. "Forgive me for this trick with the ring, please. My mother scolded me so much, and Darcy scolded me too. I'm sorry." "But seriously, why did you do that?" Mr. Chapman asked with sincere curiosity. "I'm just stupid," sighed Pearl regretfully. "I saw how Mom has been beside herself ever since she saw you in the picture, so I thought I'd arrange a sort of accidental rendezvous." "All right, I forgive you. Don't worry, Pearl, it's no big deal." A slightly disappointed Mark opened the office door, and the assistant handed him a piece of paper. "This is Mom's number. She asked you to call if you wanted to." They met in the park, where they liked to walk so many years ago. Just like then, the bright red and gold leaves rustled beneath their feet. The dog owners strolled along the paths with their fluffy pets. A fine soft rain was creeping down. Mark's throat clenched with excitement at the sight of a slender woman under a lilac umbrella. The 40-year-old Vivian was as beautiful as she has been in her younger days. "Vivi." Mark took her hand reverently. "Vivian." Mutual embarrassment and awkwardness forced them to talk about extraneous topics, joke a lot, talk about their former classmates, and talk about their lives today. It turned out that a year later, Vivian was back at the university, but transferred to a part-time department. She worked as a teacher in her hometown for a while. Then a friend offered her a job as a French teacher there. Vivian still works there. She is the happy mother of 2 grown adults, a daughter and a son. "That's why my assistant has such a brilliant talent for languages," Mr. Chapman realized. "German, French, Italian. Vivian, can I ask about Pearl?" Vivian told him that when she was 18, she had a daughter with the boy next door. They had been friends since kindergarten. He was a great guy. A couple of months before her daughter was born, he drowned. When Vivian went to the big city, her mother took care of the baby. Vivian's mother had always dreamed that her only daughter would get an education and achieve everything she wanted. The girl had no intention of hiding her daughter from Mark, but first, Vivian wanted to be sure they were in a serious relationship. And then she waited for a long time for the right moment to tell him everything. They strolled around the square for more than an hour before Mark decided to ask the only question that bothered him. "Vivian, why did you leave me?" "Mark, it's been so many years. Does it really matter now?" The golden sparks in her eyes faded. "How is Mrs. Drusilla Chapman?" "She died 3 years ago," Mark said quietly, and suddenly stopped abruptly in the middle of the narrow path. "Vivian, is it my mother? Is it my mother who forced you to leave?" "Keep your voice down, please. Let's go. Is it worth telling you about it now?" Vivian asked thoughtfully. "It is." He had no doubts. And Vivian told him how one day, Oliver, Drusilla's driver, had met her outside the university and told her that Drusilla was waiting in the car. Mark's mother was no longer playing the intelligent nice lady. She offered Vivian money and firmly declared that she would never allow her son to marry a poor farm girl. Vivian would regret it bitterly if she didn't leave Mark alone. I couldn't believe my ears at the time. You know how warmly she welcomed me. I asked her why she had changed her opinion of me so drastically, and she said that she'd always been against our relationship, just pretending not to look like a soulless witch in the eyes of her dear son. But now she has to intervene, because the daughter of her best friends returns from London in the spring. Drusilla has long wanted you two to get married, so she won't let some hick ruin her son's whole life. I, of course, threw the envelope with the money on the seat and declared that I'm not going to give up on you. And then what? Mr. Chapman was afraid of what he might hear. For 2 weeks, everything was fine. Then this Oliver stopped me outside the dormitory. He handed me a picture of Pearl. I immediately recognized that my daughter had just recently been photographed surreptitiously. So this driver was in my hometown. I was terrified. Do you remember this Oliver's face? Motionless, sullen. He looks like a criminal. Did he threaten you with a child? Mark asked in a hoarse voice. He didn't say a word. He just took Pearl's picture from me and ripped it in half. It was very clear to me. I was almost out of my mind with fear. All I could think about was my daughter. I'm sorry, Mark, but at that moment I hated you too. Mark was shocked into silence. Then they stood outside Vivian's car for a long time. If you weren't married, I'd take you out to dinner, the man admitted shyly. Let's go. I'm not married, Vivian said simply. I never was. But you have a son, don't you? Mark was confused. Vivian took her phone out of her bag and showed him the picture. The handsome, gray-eyed boy looked seriously into the camera lens. His name is Mark. He's 16 and a half. Wait, 16 and a half? So this is... Yes, your son. When I ran away from your family, I didn't know I was expecting a child. I'm sorry I didn't let you know, but you haven't been looking for me all these years either. Vivian brushed a tear from her lashes. At first, we are young, foolish, arrogant. We cherish and nurture only ourselves. And when we realize that we need to cherish the person we love like a priceless treasure, it's too late. Forgive me. Don't say anything. Don't be angry. Don't blame me. Don't try to understand. Just forgive me. Mark was silent, staring at the woman he loved with dazed eyes. Then he barely spoke. Does he know about me? Yes, I've talked about you a lot. And the other day I showed him that picture from the company party. He liked the way you looked. Vivian smiled fondly. Why don't we just skip the dinner at the restaurant? Let's go to my house. Our son is waiting. A lump in his throat made it hard to breathe. Then, Mark suddenly remembered something and scratched the back of his head, puzzled. Vivi, I accidentally stole your ring on Friday, and now I forgot to bring it with me. I'll give it back to you tomorrow, okay?